Well, welcome on into the Third Down Analysis podcast. I've got my buddy Alex Hymas here today, and we're going to talk about a couple of big picture college football items. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Alex, for those of you who don't know Alex, he is a former coworker of mine, and I brought him on because he's one of the smartest sports minds that I've come across through my travels through life. We've had some great conversations, and he also has a really good understanding of strategy, operations, data, how those all intersect together, which is part of the focus of third down analysis, is to give that unique perspective to the football field and to be able to explain through the numbers, through strategy what's happening. So, yeah, I'm glad to have you
Well,
on.
Dan, I gotta say you gotta meet a few more people if I'm at the top of that list. But I'm happy to be here.
Hey, uh, you're smart in my eyes, so we'll go with that.
There we go.
So, Alex, there's been a lot of noise about. We're going to talk about the Power Two and about the where college football is going. Back in February, there was some news about the Big Ten and the SEC maybe breaking off. That could have been negotiation power for the college football playoff negotiations that happened in the last few months, or it could have been literally them. I heard some news reports saying that the SEC and the Big Ten were inches away from saying forget the NCAA. We're going to do it on our own. So I'll give you an image. I'll paint a picture for you. Let's say that you are in a room with the heads of all the broadcast networks, with the SEC commissioner, with the Big Ten commissioner, any of the power brokers basically that could decide what to do. What And they came to you and they said, Alex, we want to know, should we break off? Would college football be better if we broke off and it was basically Big Ten, SEC, and maybe we poach a few more schools from the ACC and the Big 12, but then essentially we wipe our hands clean of them and we leave. What would your answer be?
I think I would ask a few more questions,
Okay.
right? So I think my question to them would first be, what is the value, or what are you trying to get by breaking off? Because ultimately, I think they have enough negotiating power right now that frankly, they can probably get everything that they want from the NCAA and from their TV partners without completely blowing up the structure and the setup that currently exists, right?
Okay.
So one of the questions would be like, all right, Greg Sankey of the SEC, what is the advantage of you breaking off, right? And ultimately, what does that look like? Because I think I have a hard time wrapping my mind around what that looks like and what the additional value for those conferences are. And so what I mean by that is, all right, let's imagine a world where the SEC breaks off, Big Ten breaks off, maybe they add a couple more teams, but ultimately you've got what, roughly two 16-team conferences.
Yeah.
In that group, they all think that they're better than they all think that they're the top dog, right? Which inherently, and I'll get to that, but I think that causes a problem. But ultimately, you've now limited your teams and the teams that you can play. Now they may come to me and say, okay, well, we already played a 12 game schedule. Of that, 10 of them are in conference. I only need two out of conference. We either play the other conference for that, or we add enough teams where we just play a conference schedule, which is fine. But I think there's a lot of um, I don't know. On one hand, you've got tradition that just completely spits in the face of tradition, right? To say, hey, now suddenly, like, we've got two different groups of college football. One where they all think they're the best, and there's 30 teams. One where it's kind of all the rest, and there's a few teams that are pretty good there. But suddenly, like, I actually think the dollars at play by the TV networks and frankly by the fans are a little bit more limited. So
Yeah.
suddenly you've got a question to say, is ESPN, is Fox, is Apple, is Amazon, are they going to be willing to pay everything that they're contractually obligated right now to pay to the Big 12 and the ACC and the Mountain West and whoever else? Are they going to keep paying that? And frankly, there's a lot of people that still want to watch the 120 teams or probably the 70 teams in those other conferences. Are they going to pay all of that money and pay a premium to the SEC and the Big Ten over what they're making right now? I don't know that the answer is yes to that. Now, maybe they would come back and say, yep, we know that they're going to pay us a lot more. They're going to completely demolish these other conferences and what they're going to make. And frankly, like the SEC and Big Ten shouldn't care about the financial outcomes of the other conferences. But my question would be, is it going to be a better product, and B, are you going to get more money? Because I'm not sure the answer is yes to either of those things. And so ultimately, if then the question is, like the question then is why? Like what would be the advantage to doing it? And if the answer to that question is we have more power, we have more control, okay, that's fine. I think you already have it, frankly. And I think with your negotiating size and power, you could ask the NCAA and frankly those other conferences for just about anything you want, and you're going to get it anyway. So at some point, I just don't see the value.
Uh, that's interesting. There's a couple things you said that I was thinking about this week as well. And in particular, you said the value of the money and what would happen to the money. And I think I agree with you 100% that ESPN and Fox and NBC. Well, I don't can't remember if NBC's got some other contracts with some of the smaller conferences. I know CBS does too, like CBS Sports, etc.
Yep.
Right? But yeah, they would have to. They'd contractually have to pay that premium. Like it would end up feeling like a premium. And the only thing I could think they could do to offload that would be to see if they could sell those rights to an Amazon or to an Apple TV to try to a streamer who's
Yeah.
got a lot of cash to come in. But the
But they
concern,
already but they already tried it, right?
well, they
Like
did, yeah,
these TV networks literally killed the Pac-12 for
yeah,
far less money, like for far less money
yeah,
when the Pac-12 thought they were more valuable than they were.
yeah.
And ESPN and Fox said, "We're not paying a premium for something we're already paying for." And so I would be really nervous if I was the SEC and Big 12 and the Big 10 to call their bluff on that because frankly like they've already proven that they don't want to pay more than they are.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the financial analysis inside the house at ESPN and CBS and even Fox, right, where they've got on their lower programming, they've
Yeah.
got some of the G5, because I wonder if their bigger tier uh, of the power conferences. I wonder how much of that subsidizes their broadcasting of the lower tier, and
Yeah.
if you then broke off those teams so that it literally was two or three, or it was the Big Ten, SEC, and then the rest. One of my concerns would be would there be programs that would start to die off because the money would theoretically run dry, relatively speaking.
You mean programs that get left behind?
Yeah, yeah, like I don't know, Toledo, New
Right.
Mexico,
Yeah.
Some of these programs. I don't. See, I think one of my theories that I think is widely shared, but one of my theories is that uh, every program in the country at the beginning of the season has a theoretical shot to get to the CFP. And I know that the odds for Georgia State or for New Mexico or even Oregon State to get into the CFP are very low relative to
Hmm.
the others. But they all kind of know, look, if we can pull off the miracle season and go 12 and 0, then we should get a shot to get in the CFP. And if we get in the CFP, then it's just who's the best that night. Um, and I think that that brings viewership from all of all across the country. But when you suddenly break those teams and you leave those teams behind, the sport really becomes regional. It's the Midwest and it's the South. Uh, and the question I would have is, would you have the viewership to maintain profitability? I mean, the SEC and the Big Ten probably do, but it then, the revenue model for college football is largely through TV revenue and then athletic department
Right.
earnings. But I,
Yeah.
last time I checked, most revenue departments are not, or athletic departments are not really profitable.
Right. Well, and here's you bring up schools, and I think one of the things that you got to think about is all of these schools, especially the ones that have just moved to those conferences. So we're talking about Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC. We're talking about USC and Washington to the Big Ten. Not to say nothing of the blue blood programs that were already there in each of those programs. Why do people like those programs?
The blue bloods.
Yeah,
I I think it's because they typically are ranked. It's the ranking. I
it's because
think
they win.
it's
It,
they win and they get the ranking, and
right,
then it's the logo.
right. It's because they win. And so the casual college football fans that don't care, they live wherever, but they don't live in Columbus, Ohio. They still like Ohio State, or they have a chance to like Ohio State because they're always in the top 10. They're always playing in the big games, and they're always having a winning record. Maybe they lose once or twice a year, but like that's the most for the most part. Well, what happens when now suddenly you have a 30 team college football group split into two conferences, and they're playing really good teams every game?
Yeah,
Suddenly, when Ohio State starts losing 4 games a year, or when Alabama with their new coach has to play, they can't play Southeast Tech, Alabama College of whatever, and the rack. And again, I realize they already play tough schedules, these conferences, but you take three out of conference games that for the most part right now are cupcakes, and you suddenly have to now play either more SEC teams if you're in the SEC, or you have to go play a non-conference Nebraska or USC or Wisconsin on the road.
yeah,
Like suddenly you're just going to lose more because you have less teams. So suddenly all of these teams that think they are a top 20 program, they're going to be in the bottom half of the program of this new college football world. And my guess would be that the fans of those colleges are not going to be thrilled because
yeah.
the people are not going to want to go and spend their money and 8 hours on a Saturday to watch their team lose 6 times a year, right? And so that would be my one concern if I were pushing that plan is to say, yeah, but what happened? Like we can't all go 9-1 or 11-1. So yeah, maybe Alabama stays at the top and maybe Ohio State stays at the top. But what happens when these really good programs that in large part are good because they get to play teams that are not at their same level. What happens when they start losing even 3 games more a year? You're going to have a lot of fired coaches. You're going to have a lot of unhappy fans. And ultimately, does that, again, in the financial projections, does that decrease the value of your school and your profitability? Because fans just check out. Because there are far more options for entertainment now than there were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. People don't have to watch your games. And so if you're giving them a bad team, they may not come. And again, it's not going to happen to everybody. Someone has to win the conference, but someone has to lose the conference. And there's not a ton of Vanderbilts or Rutgers or whoever else. There's not enough of those to go around if you cut every other conference in college football and say we won't play you.
Yeah, yeah. I love this point that you're making because it's an underappreciated discussion point that I've not heard discussed to much of a degree, and I would expect that in the short term, the first 2-3 years, there would actually be a bump in viewership and excitement, mostly out of
Fully agree.
curiosity. Mostly out of curiosity, but to your point, uh, I think that excitement would wear off as reality sets in, and what draws me in to fan bases or to schools and games across the country, it's honestly it's the numbers next to those schools and the logos and the history. Michigan, Ohio State did it was 19 or 17 or 19 million viewers last year, or in when they were ranked 2 and 3 at the time, and if they're ranked if they're each 6 and 5 going into that game, they're not going to get 17, 19 million. And
Right.
for those few schools though, they can probably withstand. Okay, they get 10 million. Sure, the contract with the broadcast partners is less, but they can absorb those blows. The lesser schools can't. But yeah, I think it comes down to what you're describing is something I thought about, which is winning influences brand. Winning and brand influence ranking. Ranking creates power. Even though we don't use the AP poll for seating in the CFP, I still think the AF the AP poll is still one of the most powerful uh, numbers or statistic, whatever you want to call it. It's one of the most powerful influences in college
Yeah.
football because uh, I mean, was I talking with you or someone else about this? Colorado last year. Here's an example. They go 3-0 in some wild games against teams that two of them didn't even make bowl games, and they're
Hmm.
ranked number 19 coming into the game against Oregon. Oregon's ranked number 10. By the first quarter, you know that game's over.
Yeah.
Oregon absolutely demolishes Colorado. Colorado gets sacked 8 times. Shedeur Sanders looks like he's a rag doll out there. And that game had 10 million viewers. It was the second highest viewed game in the regular season last year, behind the Ohio State Michigan
Hmm.
game. And now that's part of that is because it's Deion Sanders, but I guarantee you, if it's not Deion Sanders, they don't get the that ranking of 19, and then it just brings in
Right.
it has so much influence and so much sway. Um, so I want to ask you this other question here is about a discussion point that we've had at other points about the on the field, like a tiered system, because you've talked about some of those schools like BYU. We're both BYU fans. Well, what if you do separate them and then just allow the other power two, ACC, Big 12, maybe they scoop up some group of five, or maybe it's a collective, and they've got their own national championship that they play for. Uh, what do you think about setting up some kind of system from that perspective, though? Would that actually be good? Forget all the other things. Would that actually be good to give them, the other guys, their own national championships to play for?
I I actually think um, I've had some changes in my thinking on
Okay.
this
Okay.
over. So originally my thought was yes, right? Like I actually thought, yeah, that would be great because again, as a BYU fan, and frankly, probably 80% of college fans out there get to the point where if they try and convince themselves that their team's going to win a championship before the season, 95% of fans are just fooling themselves, and then by week two, most of them know that they were fooling themselves, right? There's very few teams that are actually gonna win the national championship even today. And so from that perspective, like, is it better to almost have like a what we've got with the Division two football and Division three football right now, right? Where it's they have their own national champions, they have their own playoff system, and frankly, like from an on the field standpoint, that actually would be pretty fun, and I think fans would get pretty invested in that. Um, where I get nervous about that and I worry about that is from the money, right?
Hmm.
Because ultimately, right now, yes, those TV contracts are locked in, but and I know I'm kind of playing devil's advocate like against what I just said for the
That's
SEC and the
okay.
Big Ten, but like the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots will get pretty big pretty quick. And I guess I like only having two conferences at what we're now considering like the peak of college football. It just feels like there's so many other teams that then like I'm not sure what happens. Like I think a lot of colleges would have to drop their football because they're just not going to make enough money
Hmm.
if they're not tied to that. Now, that might be the reason for the SEC and the Big Ten to say, peace out, like I'm not going to keep carrying you. But I guess as like the college football purist, like that's concerning and troubling to me to think about. At the same time, on the field, I actually think it'd be better because more teams are going to be in a place where they can compete. Now, compete for what? That might be different. Like, is it going to still have the same value as a national championship right now? It may not. At the end of the day, though, none of those teams are going to win the national championship today anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter. Um, but I think that's like I struggle with the idea of 30 to 32 teams at the top and literally hundreds of teams just playing for something else.
Yeah.
To me, I actually like, and this is where I want to ask you about this. There's a group out there that is proposing, and this group is made up of people from like college presidents all the way through like the NFL's number two guy. There's pretty powerful people in this group of about 20 individuals that are trying to push this. But what they're pushing for is kind of a merging between what you outlined with the two conferences going away. But what they want to do is take 70 teams, which would be everyone that's currently in a Power Five. So that's anybody in the ACC, the SEC, Big 12, Big 10, and the remnants of the Pac 12, whatever's
Pack two.
left, Pac 2, along with like Notre Dame. And then I think they said they would have a few other teams in there as well. That gets them to about 70. Then there's going to be a group of about 10, I think they said about 10 teams that are not in the Power Five that would be like included in this top group. Everyone else underneath there is not part of what we're considering like college football, I guess. But the difference is it's going to be a whole lot more like Premier League football or like other groups where there's relegation options. And so what I read is and what I heard is that any of the Power Five teams are safe from relegation, even into the future. But it's these bottom 10 teams, which we're talking like the Mountain West and the best of the Mountain West and the best of the AAC and the best of the rest, essentially, every year there will be 10 teams that play up with the big boys in the big conferences, and then the other groups don't, and but then they can go up or down depending on that. Now, what they would do is they'd break it up into 7 different divisions based on location, which frankly is what we used to have, right? You'd
Yeah.
have a Western, a Midwest, an Eastern, a North, a South, whatever. And, and they're proposing to do that. They're trying to get ESPN, Fox, everyone on board, and that ultimately they ditch the NCAA altogether. And so what that means is that the collective bargaining of the players can actually happen. NIL money can actually be far more organized, less under the table, and frankly more. There will be more money for the players and probably for the colleges as well, is what they're proposing. So ultimately, you kind of have what you're outlining with the top two, but it's not the top two, it's now the top four, essentially, right? You doubled the size of what it was. So now we got 70 teams playing. But all of the benefits and all of the advantages that we just talked about for the SEC and the Big Ten, I think they still exist. But all of the disadvantages that I talked about losing tradition and having the majority of the country not care, and about this, that, and the other, I think that goes away also. And so suddenly you now have kind of this blending of, you know, the two different ideas that I think I'm actually pretty interested. I don't know if they'd go for it, but I love the idea.
I'll give you my thoughts, and then we'll wrap this up because I know you've got a head, and then this is not going to be the only time that I'm going to have Alex on here. We're going to keep digging into this. We'll dig into BYU. We'll dig into Big 12, whatever. Uh, right. So I think that relegation system is really intriguing. That one that you said is actually one of the better ones I've heard because it still gives a ton of teams a shot at it. Uh,
Right.
the a couple of things is that I would really seriously toy with allowing any school to drop out. Uh, I don't think that the Vanderbilts and that the Kansas has been good recently, very good. I
Yeah.
think they could win the Big 12, but them, any school, I wouldn't necessarily say the worst teams that year, but I do something like teams with over a 3 to 5 year period, who's got the worst records, and I would consider dropping them down, uh,
Now,
because
to be clear, I agree with you.
yeah,
It would never be agreed to
I,
with that caveat.
I agree with you. I agree with you. There's too much history that I don't think Minnesota, which by the way has several national championships from the 40s that I was not
Yeah,
aware
who
of.
knew, right?
Yeah, 30s and 40s. They have like 6 national championships. um, anyways, that would be the one thing I would want to throw in. But what I love about that proposal is it brings everyone into the fold, regionalizes it, but keeps it national as well. I love the concept of doing away with the NCAA and creating a college football specific governing body that, like you
Yep.
said, puts protocols, puts parameters around everything. And that's the one pitch that I've heard that actually excites me as far as really restructuring, because it kind of puts everyone onto an equal playing field. They'd have to figure out revenue sharing with broadcast networks between players and between the schools, but like you said, it actually keeps. I think what it does is it gives some of the infrastructure that the pro leagues get from a revenue standpoint
Yep.
and a governing standpoint, but I think you could still preserve the uniqueness that college football has in terms of schedule. 12 games, you still almost have to go undefeated to a degree. Maybe
Yep.
they do a playoff, but I think that it keeps you. College football has to keep part of what college football is, because otherwise it just becomes NFL light, and I don't think that NFL light is going to be a sustainable model going forward. So Anyways,
Yeah, no, I agree. That's actually a great way to like summarize that first option of Big Ten and SEC leaving. It's a worse version of the NFL, right? And I think what's interesting, and we could get into this in another pod, but like NFL people don't always like college football, and college football people don't always like the NFL. And at some point, like if you get away from what made college football unique and what made all of those fans of those hundreds of teams, but especially the two conferences, if you get away from what they like about college football in lieu of more money because you want to be like the NFL, I'm not sure that's the right adjustment to make
right.
from a value prop standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree with you. Well, thanks for jumping on, Alex. This was awesome. This is going to be the first of many. And together we're going to change the world of college football.
There we
So,
go. They just have to listen to us.
yeah, yeah. So we are going to. I'm going to send this to Greg Sankey if I can ever get his address, and
We'll find a
we'll
way.
figure it out. So cool. Okay. Well,
Okay, thanks, Danny.
thanks for jumping on, Alex.
Appreciate it.